All right. We are live. Welcome, everyone. My name is Jared. I'm one of the team members at Podcast Movement. And I'm really excited today. We've got John Lynch. He's the Director of Business Development for BSW. And we also have Michael Pettersen, who's the Shure Microphones official historian. So we're basically going to talk about the history of the legendary Shure SM7B. And gentlemen, thank you for being here. And why don't you start out by maybe telling a little bit about yourselves and then what's going on?
Well, thank you, Jared. We'll do that. I am John Lynch from BSW, and our company has been around since 1973. We were founded actually by our founder, great gentleman by the name of Irv Law, in his garage. In 1973, we've grown into what we are today, 48 years later, and it's been quite a run. I have been with this company for more than 28 years, and it is a pleasure to welcome Michael Pettersen, who is the Shure historian, and we're going to be talking about Shure products and such, particularly the SM7B, but there's a lot of history before that microphone came on the marketplace, and that's what we want to get to as well. But before we even do that, Michael, how did Shure Incorporated get started?
So you guys are a baby, 1973. We started in 1925 in Chicago. SN Shure was our founder, one-man operation back then, and it was a radio parts company. So if you're a radio hobbyist in 1925 and you want to have your own AM radio, you got to build it from parts. And so Mr. Shure was a hobbyist. His uncle and his dad had a catalog business that sold household goods. So Mr. Shure says, I'm going to do the same thing, but I'm going to sell radio parts instead. Okay. So that's how we started out. For the first 4 or 5 years, it was radio parts. But then guess what? You can buy radios off the shelf. And so the radio parts business started to decline. And Mr. Shure is looking at another way to stay in the business. And he says, microphones might be an interesting thing to get into because two-way radio was new. Radio was growing itself as far as broadcast radio. Television was in the experimental stages. Recording studios were going in. Everybody needed microphones. So he thought that was a good business to get into. We started distributing microphones made by a company called Ellis in 1929. And in 1932, we said, let's build and manufacture them ourselves. So we've been building and manufacturing our own microphones since 1932.
1932. So next year makes it 90 years worth of Shure microphones.
Correct.
Now, right. The one we're talking about isn't quite that old.
No.
But it predates the term podcast.
Oh, yeah.
By a lot.
Yeah, by many years.
So it's not, Shure's not new to the business. BSW is not new to the business. The SM7B is not new to the business, but quite a history that virtually anybody could recognize with what started with a Unidyne 1.
That's right. So listeners probably know the Unidyne 1. Many people refer to it as the birdcage microphone. Elvis microphone's another one. And whenever you're on a web page that says, click on the microphone in the upper right-hand corner of your screen, that's typically the image of a Unidyne microphone.
Well, let's interrupt for a second, because if you're seeing a classic picture of Elvis on stage and he's got a stand microphone and he's shaking it back and forth, doing everything that's the Unidyne from Shure.
Right. And it could be a Unidyne 1, which is a larger one, or a Unidyne 2, which is a smaller one. But that was a big breakthrough. We introduced that in 1939, and it was the world's first single element moving coil cardioid microphone. Huge breakthrough.
Now, okay, wait a minute. You got a lot of terms in there.
I do. Them. I do. So cardioid is heart-shaped. It's a directional microphone. It's a microphone that picks up better from the front than the back. That's fairly simple.
Better from here than from here.
You got it, exactly. Moving coil, also known as a dynamic microphone, is kind of like a loudspeaker in reverse. It has a diaphragm, a coil of wire hung on the back of it, and it's suspended in a magnetic field. So that's what the long terms mean. But before that, if you wanted a cardioid microphone, it required two different microphone elements inside the same chassis. And that was expensive. So this is a big breakthrough, and the Unidyne became a hit very, very, very fast. By the end of the 1940s, it was probably the primary microphone for sound reinforcement, used at broadcast as well. So 1951, we bring out a smaller version because television came about and said the Unidyne 1's too large, covers up too much of the face. make me a smaller one.
Well,
So
it was part of that. But I think, don't you think it was also the TV screen in those days was that big?
absolutely. Yeah, exactly. Right.
Today's TV screens, they probably wouldn't care.
Very true. Very true. So we bring out the smaller version, the Unidyne 2, by the way, which we still make today, interestingly enough,
Mhm.
in 1951. And then in 1959, we bring out what is called the Unidyne 3, which is an end fire microphone, a microphone that you sing into the end of it rather than into the side of it. And inside the SM7 is the Unidyne 3 element that we first introduced in 1959.
What was the reason to go to end fire instead of side address?
Primarily because, well, two things. First of all, an end fire microphone, being a cigar shape, for lack of a better term, is easier to hold in your hand and to move around, like like Jerry Lee Lewis and
Yep.
Elvis. They wanted to gyrate on stage and move around, so it was easier to hold.
Mhm.
Second of all, the polar pattern on it was more uniform, and basically, if you have a microphone that has the polar pattern that's more uniform at more frequencies, you can simply turn it up louder on stage without it feeding back. And of course, with rock and roll getting louder and louder and louder, they wanted microphones that didn't feed back as easily.
You
And
think?
yeah, exactly. And an end fire microphone, by its design, tends to be more resistant to feedback than a side fire microphone. So that was the reason.
Exactly. Okay. Now, what I happen to be using today is the new Shure MV7, which we'll talk about a little bit later in the program. But
That's what I'm using too, John. I'm using that
exactly,
too. Yeah.
just can't see yours. But
Yeah, right.
by the way, available in black or in silver.
Yeah, I've got the
I think
silver.
the black looks better, but that's an opinion. So
Yeah, the silver version was what I could get.
anyway, so but we've gone from the Unidyne 3, then we go into something that old broadcasters like me, and I've got the hair for it, we remember very fondly. In fact, we still get calls about it every year.
Yeah, I know where this is going.
You know where I'm going. It's called the SM5.
The SM5. So the SM5 was our first, actually it was designed to be a boom microphone, a microphone that it would hang over actors on a stage, with a TV stage or
And
film stage.
outside of the range of the camera, right?
Yep, outside the range of the camera. And it had a Unidyne 3 element in it and was covered by basically two really big, large Nerf footballs on each end, for lack of a better term. Because the thing was about the size of a football, really, if you think about it. Right?
It was
Right.
huge.
And that came out in 1964. And we were trying to crack into the boom microphone market. Didn't really do very well on that, but radio broadcasters started picking up and close talking and saying, "Man, this makes a really good voiceover microphone."
Yes, close talking,
right.
not
Exactly.
back here, but
No, exactly.
right up here. Yes, exactly.
So I think the size of it and the look of it and the sound of it made it very successful. Now, we didn't sell that many of them, but radio stations loved them. You're right about that. And
that was the one that all of us in broadcast, we all referred to it as the big contact capsule.
Yes.
If you remember that cold medication from way back, but it just looked like a big capsule. And for whatever reason, I think when we got to the factory, the two windscreens, one on the front, one on the back, were a little bit different shades.
Yeah, different color. One was a dark gray and one was a light gray, and that dark and light thing was actually taken from our SM57 and SM58 microphones, which had a dark or kind of a lighter gray handle and darker gray flecks on it. So for some reason, this dark gray, light gray thing, it was just a stylized aspect of it.
Probably to let the announcer know which side was the right end.
One would hope so. But then again, I've seen people talking to the side of an SM7. So, yeah.
But as you said, though, it wasn't designed for broadcast, but broadcast got all over it. And something that broadcasters have done for years and decades, really. You find something from someplace else, but it happens to work over here in this radio studio. So they glom onto that. And the SM5B was maybe not the business success that Shure had hoped for, but certainly was an artistic and scientific success for broadcasters.
Right. And the problem with that is that radio broadcasters, they took too good care of their microphones. They didn't ruin them. So they bought their first SM5, and then all they needed is replacement windscreens. They never bought any more.
Exactly. So, but then we come to what has been around almost 50 years.
Almost 50 years, yeah.
The SM7.
Yep.
And it goes back to, it it goes back to the year I started in broadcasting is when it goes back to 73, I believe, wasn't it?
Yep. So in 1969, we decided to make a smaller version of an SM5 and to aim it directly at voiceover. That was all. So we took things we had. We had the Unidyne 3 element. We had a yoke already. We had a lot of different parts. Put them together, came up with the SM7. And that was introduced in the end of 1972, first sold in the spring of 73.
Now, that one did well.
Yes.
We won't say it jumped off the charts, but it was doing better than the SM5.
Yeah, by a factor of 10. But,
right.
Yeah.
But here's something that, we broadcasters think of it, okay, here's a great studio microphone. Yet I go back and see old pictures in from recording sessions by singers way back in the day using SM7s.
Yeah.
You don't think of it that way, but it got used that way.
Yeah. One of the first bands to adopt it was the Rolling Stones. Rolling Stones had a mobile unit, a recording studio in a truck in the UK. And one of the microphones on it was the SM7 that they would take. And they started recording Mick Jagger's vocals on it. And he sounded pretty good on an SM7. And they started in the 70s, and they still do it to this day, where when he's in the studio, they'll record him on a condenser, typically a Neumann, and an SM7 side by side, have both tracks. And then during the mix down, they'll take a listen and see which one sounds better. And many times it's the SM7. So that was a big deal, but there weren't a lot of photos of Mick in the studios, but he indeed did it.
Probably a licensing thing.
Could have well been. But the Michael Jackson's Thriller album was probably the really big hit for the SM7. Quincy Jones, the producer, tried a lot of different microphones on Michael Jackson. Turned out the SM7 just matched well with his voice. And from there on, the Michael Jackson albums were SM7s. And that was, of course, Thriller was a huge hit.
And let's bring that up because and you can understand this from all your history with Shure, and I've learned this over the years from being in broadcast and being over here. The SM7 is a great microphone. But like every other microphone on the planet, it is not the best microphone for every voice out there.
Yeah, no, that's why there's so many microphones.
Exactly.
They're tools. You choose the right tool for the right job. So yeah, that's why recording studios have mic lockers. Let's try this on this person. Let's try this on this person. Let's see what works. And you can't. And that's the thing. I used to work in application engineering, and we get the offices calling up, and they would say over the phone, "What's going to work for my voice?" I can't tell you.
Right. Exactly.
Particularly over the phone.
But we also have, and we deal with a number of voiceover artists around the country and around the world, and they tell us the same thing. They have their own locker of microphones because this microphone will fit better on this project and another one will fit better on this project, et cetera. So it depends on what you're trying to do for that particular project and how your voice reacts with that particular microphone.
I kind of like, John, I like to think of them as kind of camera lenses, right? Camera lenses do give you different images and give you different feels and so forth. Same with microphones.
Now, we go with the SM7 and it does well up to a certain point.
Yeah.
But then just like when the broadcasters took on the SM5, lo and behold, a little over a decade ago, something else got going called podcasting. And all of a sudden they start realizing, hey, the SM7 works well.
Right. So the SM7, and let's just, so the listeners know, the SM7, just nothing, no A or B after that, was from 1973 to 1999. We added the A in 1999 when we improved the humbucking coil that's inside the microphone.
Now that's a fun term right there, but you better explain why it's there in the first place.
A lot of radio stations started to put CRT monitors close to their DJs or their on-air people so they could read the reports or the news or off of the screens rather than off of a piece of paper. And those CRT monitors tended to create a hum field. You can't see it, but it's a electronic hum field around them. And when the SM7 was too close to it, you would hear, like that. So there was a humbucking coil in it from the beginning, but it needed to be improved. So we put a better humbucking coil in it, and that became the A. And then 2 years later, we added the larger windscreen, which looks an awful lot like a miniature version of the SM5.
Gee, I wonder how that came about.
Oh, well, we tried to listen to the broadcasters, and that became the B.
Mm-hmm.
So the only difference basically is the SMB has the improved humbucking coil and the larger windscreen. That's an accessory if you want to use it.
Now, I got a question. I interrupt here because this goes back to the video monitor world. Do we need the humbucking coil now like we did 15 years ago?
Typically not, but you just never know, particularly at the home. You never know when there's going to be a hum field.
There you go.
For example, I had a clock sitting on my desk that I've had for years. Turned out it had a motor in it. It had a pretty darn good hum feel around it. And I happened to bring that closer to the microphone that, listen to that. So move the clock away. So yes, there are still hum things but they don't necessarily have to be your monitors, but they can be other things that create hum.
And if they're developing some kind of a hum with whatever microphone that they happen to be using at the time, they just got to try, hey, let's get this out of the way, see if that's the issue, or get that out of the way, whatever. Right?
Yeah. Or use the microphone as a hum finder. Put your headphones on and move it around and go, wow, gets close to that lamp and it hums. Maybe I better move that lamp away or put something different on.
Good point. Because and that's not engineering, that's just tracking down where the problem is. If you just eliminate the problem, you don't have to do anything else.
It's just physics. Yeah, exactly. So you mentioned podcasting. So it was around 2008 that podcasters discovered the SM7. Now I would love to know how this happened. Maybe they were listening to Thriller and saw a picture of Michael Jackson and say, gee, I wonder how that microphone would sound for podcasting. Anyway, they started talking to each other. And all of a sudden, here at Shure, we're still thinking we're selling this for voiceover, for TV and radio, and it's been selling the same for 35 years. And now the sales start to crank up and crank up and crank up. I'm like, what the heck's going on here? And we start doing some research.
Nice problem to have.
Yeah, it is a nice problem. Right? And we start doing some research into it, and we start saying, wow, there's these guys called podcasters, and they were telling each other about this, and it really is starting to build. Built for about 7 years, and then gamers got in on it. Gamers, spending $500 for a microphone, right? And it starts to build even more of that. And then the pandemic hit, and it went through the roof. It is absolutely crazy. I can't give you exact numbers, but I can tell you this: if you look at our units sold in the last 12 months versus units sold in the year 2000, almost 100 times greater.
Oh. Which explains, for the first time in my memory, that's 28 years here at BSW, we were out of stock of SM7s for a while last year.
Right. And you can imagine going back to the suppliers that have been making you some part for 40 years.
Yep.
And you say, I know we've wanted 1,000 of those last year, but now we want 100,000 of them, or whatever the number is. And your suppliers look at you like, what?
Yeah. What's going on here? Oh.
Right. Exactly. So
I got to share something with you. We're going to go back into history again. We're going to go back to the SM5 just for a moment here.
Yep.
Because one of the other things that I've done in radio over the years, I was involved in sportscasting. And one of the sports was boat racing, which is huge in the Seattle area where I was at the time, where I grew up. And we had a station. It was actually the leading rock and roll station in town, but they would broadcast the race every year because
hydroplanes.
Yes, exactly.
Okay. Yeah.
So anyway, and their program director, who is now, unfortunately, we lost him last year, but he's now recognized in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in Cleveland for his contributions to the rock and roll radio business in the Northwest.
Mm-hmm.
He got started in announcing the races, got hooked on it, started doing it every year. And that radio station, they made a big production out of it. But I went up there one year and they're on the start finish line. And of course, this is back in the days in hydroplanes when you could actually hear them. They were using World War II engines. These things were louder than that. It was awesome. Anyway, so I'm looking down the road, and this is before I knew this microphone versus this one. And then I figured it out years later. Here is this gentleman calling the race, got a big radio console on this scaffold in Seattle on the side of on the beach of Lake Washington.
Yeah.
And he's got one of these big old mic arms in there.
Yep.
He's calling the race into an SM5. Couldn't believe it. Well,
outside.
just
Outside.
take
Yeah.
the radio station to the lake. I thought, well, that was
Right.
great, but it sounded tremendous.
Yeah. Yeah.
And anyway, just had a little sidebar there.
And you know something, and the nice with that, all that foam there, if the
Mhm.
microphone had gotten wet by
Mm-hmm.
spray, it would never migrate inside because the water can get there. It just sits on the surface.
Right.
So that was perhaps another reason. I don't know.
And now you've got that same windscreen going with the SM7, which, by the way, they get automatically. They get both windscreens with the SM7B. So you could try it the way it was originally designed, or try it with the SM5 style windscreen. Or you can even try it without, like they did on Northern Exposure on that TV show.
Yeah, I've seen people use it without as well. I think just because of the funkiness.
I'm sorry, I'm not going there, but hey, they did, so that's okay. And I don't even know if they used it or if that was just a prop.
It was a prop, because if you look really close at a photo, I saw they had a cable going into where the XLR connector is, right?
Mhm.
But the cable had a 3.5 millimeter plug on it.
That's not going to work on it.
So I'm pretty sure it's just a prop.
But anyway, see, this microphone, though, that's what I say. It's not some new whiz bang thing that came out. You guys came up with something great almost 50 years ago, and here it keeps going.
Right. And imagine the issues of being a product manager at a company like Shure, where I report to you, John, and I'm the product manager for the microphones. And you say to me on the 35th year, this SM7's run its course. I don't think we're going to do it. And I go, no, boss, the 36th year, it's really going to take off. No one is ever going to believe that. Or another thing is, would Apple wait 36 years for one of their iPhones to take off? Probably not.
Yes, exactly.
So microphones are odd things. They can literally have decades worth of lifespan in the market. It's astonishing.
They get discovered by some other element, whether it's podcast. I mean, another one of the popular studio microphones over the years began as a kick drum microphone.
Yeah.
Right. But hey, sounds good in the studio. Let's use it. See, and broadcasters, and I can say this because I was one, have a tendency to find stuff elsewhere and bring it in because they like it fits the budget, things of that nature. But hey, the end result in a radio situation, you don't have a picture.
Right.
It's all audio, so it better sound really good than that microphone does. The SM7B.
Yep. And new generations discover it, and sometimes it skips a generation. I don't like that microphone. And they say, oh, let's go back and look at that one. A lot of different reasons, but
absolutely. By the way, want to give our viewers here a little tip from BSW, because till April 30th, we're doing a special specifically for Podcast Movement University attendees at bswusa.com or at 800-426-8434. You can order an SM7B, 15% discount. It's only available through PMU. And so you call us or you email us at or log on at bswusa.com. Promo code, this was a tough one, SM7B.
Wow.
That's the promo code. 50% off on a
let me write that down.
There you go. Till April, close of business on Friday, April 30th. Now, we're not using SM7Bs.
No.
We're using a really good microphone that doesn't cost the same price as the SM7B. And as you've told me previously, it's not a direct descendant, but it's a cousin.
It's a
this
cousin.
one here, the MV7. Tell us how that came about.
Yep. So there were people who just said, I can't afford the SM7, because what's typically like SM7B is like $499, I think, retail, something like that. And then you got to get an interface to take the analog audio output and turn it into a USB output and so forth. And for some people, it's just too complicated, too expensive. And so they said, wow, it would really be cool if I could have the equivalent of an SM7, but with a USB output directly out of it, so I don't have to go through that. So that's exactly what an MV7 is. It's got a USB output on it, goes directly into your computer. But then,
along with the XLR connection.
Yeah, exactly. But then somebody at Shure said, when I said, hey, while we're at it, why don't we just put an XLR output on it as well? And so here you've got a microphone that basically has a USB output on it, headphone output on it. That's what I'm listening to myself, and an XLR analog output on it as well. How cool is that? I was using it yesterday. I was doing a podcast with the Shure UK office, and we were having the online conversation via the USB output on the MV7, but then my XLR output was going into a small little digital recorder, and I was recording a WAV file of my responses. And then I sent that WAV file over to Shure UK, and they combined it with a WAV file on their side. So it's how NPR does it, right? They have, you go to two different studios to do two different recordings, and then they combine them later. And so it's really great. So you got one mic that does two things at the same time. Very cool.
And not very often either, but it's kind of like what you were talking about with Mick and the Stones, and he had two microphones. Well, now you've got essentially two microphone feeds off of one microphone that you can do simultaneously if you have the need for that.
Yep. And there's a free app you can get to it that does compression and limiting and so forth. I never use it just because I'm lazy, but you can use the app as well. Or you can just run it right off the microphone itself has a little slide panel on it where you adjust microphone output level, headphone output level. It's really simple, very easy to use.
Just wanted them to have the idea of, okay, we're talking about the SM7. That's our focus here, but this is the new generation unit, a kind of a cousin to the SM7. But such a history going all the way back, what was it, 1939?
39.
Unidyne original, not Unidyne 1, all the way up to the SM7. And here we are. And that thing is rocking on bigger than it ever did. I mean, does anybody at Shure tell you, yeah, we knew that was going to happen over the time? So, yeah.
No, it keeps you very humble.
Yeah, exactly. So,
yeah, no, we didn't predict it. But, when I see things like Bruce Springsteen and President Obama, they have a podcast and they're using SM7s. And I saw a broadcast from Willie Nelson's home studio and uses SM7s. I could almost not, go anywhere, and you just see it everywhere. And it's very, very cool. And it's all happened without us advertising. This has all happened by word of mouth and online presence and so forth.
And users realizing that's a good microphone.
Right. And that's the best way to do it, because, you're the company. You have to tell us it's a great microphone. But then when your buddy tells you it's a great microphone, it's a whole different way.
It makes a big difference there. And there's an awful lot of buddies out in the podcast world, and they're sharing this information back and forth. And, keep in mind the microphone, though. And I think we should emphasize this. The microphone isn't the only important thing in the entire audio chain.
Right. I mean, to a certain extent, you get, garbage in, garbage out. You better start with a good signal.
Yeah.
Because you can't do anything after that.
But you want to start with that. And then, hey, there are certain microphone preamps that certain people like to use, microphone processors, so they can shape the audio the way they want to, rather than just accepting whatever this comes in via the USB connection. So there are things you can do to improve the SM7 or the MV7 even more.
Yep. Now the SM7's got two switches on the back. We haven't talked about that.
Good. Bring those up, because what they do. And by the way, how you do them properly and what you can do that can foul you up too. So with two switches. So
there's one switch which rolls off the low end, reduces the bass. So if you got a particularly heavy bass voice, and when you're working the microphone really close, you might get what's called proximity effect, which is a buildup of the bass, and perhaps you sound muddy. So you can throw that switch in, and that reduces some of the bass.
I don't think I have that problem.
Yeah. I don't ever work the mic.
More of a second tenor than bass. But see, that's one of the adjustments, and it's just on the microphone itself. So it's just a simple switch one way or the other, on and off. Right. And then all you do is, hey, try it both ways.
Exactly.
Which way you like. Here's something else they could do. Okay. Right.
And then
you try it like this when you're right on top of it. You could also back off a few inches, see if you like where you like it. And that's something else that you should be doing as far as good mic technique. Different microphones you're going to work with differently. So try what works best for your voice and your microphone, and then go from there.
That's right. And the other switch basically boosts the high end, the treble frequencies, or cuts them. So, for example, women tend to have a lot of high frequencies in their voice. They have just a higher pitch. And sometimes a woman using the SM7 can sound a little bit sibilant. You hear a little too much of the S's, if you will. So you can throw the switch in there and reduce that as well. So
now, are those switches common, or is that exclusive to the SM7 from the Shure line, for example?
I don't think I've ever seen them on any out of their microphone. I mean, I've seen bass roll-off switches, but never typically the high-end booster cut. That's a little bit unusual.
And it's just right on the back end of an SM7. So
right.
simple to try. If you like it one way and you don't like it the other way, then you put it in one way and you're done. End of story.
Yeah. And sometimes you'll see, if you see an SM7 where it doesn't seem to have the switches on the back, it's because there's a cover plate that comes with it that you can cover those switches up.
Okay.
So, for example, I think when you get it, I don't remember, I haven't looked in the package recently, but I think when you get it, the cover plate is not on there, so you see the switches. But if you find one of your buddies got and you look on the back and the switches aren't there, it's because he's put a cover plate over there to cover those switches so that someone doesn't switch them accidentally.
Wait a minute. No, change that phrase.
Okay.
Somebody doesn't switch them. Nobody switches them accidentally.
Oh, right. Doesn't switch them. Right. Yeah.
I can say this from a broadcast perspective because there's so many things in a broadcast studio that the engineers will put behind security covers so nobody can get their fingers in on that one.
It's a security cover for the switches.
Exactly. So make sure once you've got them. And now, can you tell just by listening in the headphones which is the way to go, or should you record and play it back and then tell which you like?
Record and play it back, because when you're speaking yourself, you're hearing a lot of your own voice through your bone conduction in your head, and you're not getting a true idea of what you sound like. So you got to record it, play it back, say, okay, here's the SM7 with this switch with a bass roll off, and then listen back to it. So yes.
Now that brings up a point that I share with a lot of people just because I added to the story, and that is, tell me anybody's voice you can think of, and I will tell you unequivocally, I'm pretty darn sure they don't like the sound of their voice.
Of course.
Because I don't care. I mean, all the greats, because they hear it from in here.
Yep.
You're not hearing it from the speakers. So the ones who become really successful just get used to, that's what I sound like. Yep. Okay, now I need to maximize that. But to think that, nobody's going to like the way that you sound compared to you, you're going to be the most critical listener there. So it's just a matter of, getting used to what your voice is doing, and then go from there. But understand that you pick a voice, I'll guarantee you, they don't like hearing it from themselves. They get used to it.
Yeah, that was for me. I never thought I had much of my voice at all. And when I started working at Shure, someone said, "Oh, you can do some voiceovers for it." So, what? You want me to do voiceover? He says, "Yeah, you have a kind of a radio voice." I said, "No, I don't."
You do. But you can't hear it because it's from in here and not coming from those speakers over there. So for all of our viewers here, that's what I like to get across, is understand you're not probably going to like the sound of your voice. That's okay. Everybody else will. Yeah. You get used to using it properly. That's why we talk about, hey, you might want to work the microphone this way. Mm-hmm. You might want to work it that way. Whichever mic it happens, find the sweet spot. Some of them have a sweet spot that's that big, others that big. People that have watched certain talents on air and on video, sometimes they're sitting this far back from a microphone, this kind of a microphone, but it works for them.
Right.
Others want to be right on top of it. And in other cases, you've got somebody that's using an omnidirectional microphone doing a stand-up on the White House lawn. Mm-hmm. The microphone's way down here. But that works for that particular microphone, that what they're doing there. So every microphone, use it to its advantage.
Yep. They're tools. They're tools. That's the best way to think about it.
Mm-hmm. And some of them are adjustable wrenches, and some of them are really specific sockets or whatever, because they've got that kind, and now let's talk about, because Shure does this, other companies do this and things of that nature. You've got different styles, because people talk about, there's omnidirectional, mm-hmm. which you're not usually going to use in a studio situation, because you may have speakers, you may just have loud headphones.
Right.
And that's going to pick up a lot of feedback, and that's not going to work. So mostly in a studio conversion situation, we're using cardioid, but then you've got supercardioid, then you've got hypercardioid, then you got
bidirectionals.
Bidirectionals. You've got shotgun styles. And matter of fact, one of the most popular shotgun microphones is used as voiceovers, mm-hmm. because of what it does for that particular kind of usage. So that's another thing, in the podcast world, for your general podcast, you may be doing something on a particular microphone. But if you're doing other projects, you might want to have other microphones to work with.
Yeah. Here's a perfect example of omnidirectional microphones. So there's a lot of reasons to use an omnidirectional microphone, but one of the best ones is that they are very unsusceptible to wind noise. You can take you can take a cardioid microphone outside, and because of the number of openings it's got to get into the microphone cartridge, they tend to be not very good in wind. You can take that same situation, change nothing, but put an omnidirectional microphone out there and hardly hear the wind at all. So, you can't say that, omnis are bad. No, they're a different tool.
It's a tool. There you go.
And
by the way, I've got something to share with you on that. Where you do not use an omnidirectional microphone.
Go ahead.
When you're interviewing the pilot of the Goodyear blimp while flying. I did that. Back in the day, I didn't know microphones. I just had the one I had, recorded it, wasn't able to monitor the recording or anything. We're having a great time. We're talking back and forth, doing all this kind of stuff. I get it back to the studio. I can only hear the doggone engines. That's it. Nothing. And loud. So if I had a super cardioid mic, it probably would have been an ideal interview. Well, I lost that one. Well, that's the point of know where you're going and what microphone you're going to need, so you don't have a Goodyear blimp experience like I did.
But that also brings out something, and that's something that when I give lectures on microphones, I always tell them microphones are stupid. Microphones measure air movement, and they don't care what causes the air to move.
Right.
So you're in their Goodyear blimp, and your brain and your ears are concentrating on what the pilot's saying, and you're having a conversation. But the microphone's sitting there picking up all the air movement, and it doesn't know what you want to listen to.
Yep.
So that's the other thing where people say, well, gosh, that's not what I heard. Well, your brain was processing it. You could be at a party and you can have a conversation where there's 100 people talking, but if you recorded that was going on there and listened back to it, you wouldn't be able to make any sense out of it. So,
well, one other thing too, you brought up, because we just always emphasize this. Hey, you want to have the proper tool. So you're not thinking about the tool, you're thinking about your content.
Right. Yep.
And I thought about the content in the blimp, but I didn't have the proper tool, didn't know that until later. But the point is, not every microphone is going to be ideal for every project. So you might want to add to your stock as time goes on and as budget allows. But you find what's working for you in the podcast world here with Podcast Movement University, and hey, stay with that, because that's what people are going to hear from you. But when you have another project that would be totally different, maybe you look at doing a different microphone at that time.
The other thing is buy microphones from manufacturers and you trust, because if you take good care of them, I've got a Shure SM7B I bought 50 years ago. I still use it. As long as you don't lose it, or maybe throw it into the ocean, it's going to continue to work well for you. So stick with the main brands and take care of them, and you never have to buy another one unless you want to get a different tool.
Well, and let's face it, the SM58 is rather forgiving.
Oh yeah,
because you go out and you see SM58s, and there's a dent on the screen here and here and here, and it still works fine.
Yep, exactly. But I tell someone I said, if you're going to buy an SM58 at the beginning of your career, and you'll never need another microphone if you happen to like that. You might want another microphone, different microphone, but you won't need another one because it'll just continue to work.
And do what you need for that particular setting, and there you go. By the way, we're going to welcome back Jared when he has a moment, because there may be some questions that you have. We wanted to get the people involved. So if you've sent questions in, or you are going to do so now, Michael is here. You've got the historian for sure. So
it doesn't have to be SM7 questions. It could be any Shure questions.
Jared, what you got there?
Well, all right. There's some questions, and I think some of these are people that are just kind of new and asking.
That's okay.
So one question here, and I'll put it up on the screen so anybody who's viewing can also see it. This is from Cinda Brett Murphy. Why wear headphones when you're talking to someone right in front of you, like Joe Rogan does?
John, you want to?
I'll give it my answer to that first, because I want to know what I sound like. And if I'm not on headphones It's kind of like I'm doing that Goodyear blimp interview again because I don't know there's a problem. Or if I happen to get off microphone and I'm talking this way and I'm not wearing headphones, I don't know that. So that's a security issue. That's a safety issue. You don't have to, but you'll find that you have fewer retakes and things like that because there's not a technical issue because your earphones can get that. Now, maybe you wear the cans like I have and like Michael's wearing, or you want those little earbuds or something like that. Whatever works for you, you want to be able to monitor what you sound like when you're conducting the interview.
Also, there could be a third person that might say, we only got 5 minutes left or something like that. You know, you get things from the producer.
Okay.
Yeah. Like Jared saying like that, you guys are boring. Get off the air, you know.
I would message that. I wouldn't say it live.
Hey, whoever sent that one in, that's a very good question. So that was good.
That's a good question.
This isn't a question, but it's kind of a fun comment. This is from Mr. Josh Long, and he says, I got my SM7B 6 years ago, and it's still amazing.
Josh, I got mine in 1974, and they're both still amazing.
And Josh, you should have yours working just fine for the next 20, 30, 40 years, no issues, unless you run into an issue that, like he says, you took it out to the lake to call the boat race and you dropped it into the lake. Well, that's a problem, okay?
Yeah, it's very seriously, sometimes the foam will disintegrate because there's ozone in the air attacks the foam, and you probably have to replace the windscreen eventually. But that should be about it, unless if you take good care of it. My SM7s from 1974, they both work just fine. I've had to replace the foam, I think, twice on them.
We have plenty in stock of both styles of windscreens from the SM7, and that's something you should replace. Don't be stuck with something that's not working as well anymore and wear out. But the microphone itself, keep going. There you go.
So I don't have the foam. I have this little thing, as you see, and then that created a question. What is the screen in front of the microphone for? So let's talk about that. Why foam? I mean, you might have touched on this a little bit, but let's just go there again.
Okay, well, I'll get into it first, and then let Michael give you the scientific response. Number one, what we have is something called popping, when we pop peas and things of that nature. Now, the pop filter like you're using there, Jared, sitting in front of the microphone, that has an advantage. There are two different types, by the way. There's a nylon one, and then there's steel mesh. Steel mesh works better. I can't tell you why, but it does. But the point of that is some people in some microphones, others, not this one, but not the SM7, but some microphones don't react positively to having foam wrapped around them. So you put the pop filter in front of it. You're not covering up anything. And you've got the pop filter in front, and then all that is doing is knocking down the plosives. That's the only thing it's supposed to do. You wouldn't use that like in an outdoor situation. It's not a wind screen. You're not cutting down wind. That's what you would use with something like this. But that's the reason for that. Now, some people will tell you, hey, with a proper mic technique, you don't need that. And they're right. How many of us have proper mic technique 100% of the time?
Well, I've noticed all three of us are not speaking directly to the microphone. The microphone's at an angle. We're talking across it. And when you do that, you cannot pop a pea. Because, if you put the microphone underneath your nose, you're going to pop it. If you put it off to the side of your mouth, I think Frank Sinatra used to work the microphone over here, right? He would never pop a pea because you can't pop it when it's over here. So that's why all three of us have the microphone off to the side, not in front of our faces.
So basically, Jared, not required, but a good idea, one or the other.
Yep.
And I think from now on, if anyone asks me that, I'm going to use the Frank Sinatra story as my
true.
Well, Frank Sinatra did. Well, if it was good enough for him.
Remember who Frank was. Frank was
this question is from Mo, and Mo? You mentioned Michael Jackson and the Thriller album. Is there any other like interesting or iconic different things that have been created and that you can tell us about that's just interesting, like little facts?
Most of the Rolling Stones, most of Mick Jagger's vocals have been through SM7s, even though we don't have photographs to tell you that. But we know that because of our contacts with the Stones people.
And like I explained, that's a licensing deal, I'm sure. So
yeah, exactly. But I'm just thinking of all the different things. NPR uses them, right, for a lot like that. Robin Quivers does on the Howard Stern show. She's always using SM7. Willie Nelson uses them in his home studios. I've even seen Apple use them. Apple used them at a press conference.
Nice.
Yeah, but I got to you, this is like, I didn't expect this Apple. They had the plate, the cover plate on the back, and they put a piece of tape across the back of it so you couldn't read it. It says Shure. Come on, Apple.
Well, I've been in some hotels where they blocked off the name of the elevator company too. So
Really?
Yes. Right. For me, anyway. But so that happens. Next one. Go ahead, Jared.
Well, that's kind of where we're at for now. Not to say that we're not going to have a few more here. Maybe in the meantime, we can just kind of chat for a second, John and Michael, and you can kind of tell people if they want to stay connected with what's going on with the latest mics and stuff. What do you recommend? Where can people stay informed?
Well, you know, with the Shure, you got Shure.com. Great website, a lot of technical details, a lot of examples. We're doing something over at BSWUSA.com that we started over the last year. In fact, one of them was with Michael, and we have a program we call Tech Dive. So you'll find it on our YouTube channel, and they're devoted to specific topics with specific manufacturers. Now, people that know me, especially engineers in the broadcast world that know me, being the ex-sportscaster, not the engineer type, my engineering response is usually to the question of, how's it work? Works real good. We go get Michael, or we go to get somebody else from the factory or whatever. I mean, I've picked up a few things over the years, but I don't profess to be a technical expert, but I know who are. And that's so we go to those people, and we have different manufacturers and what they brought, including Michael from Shure, and also Soren. We did one with him on this specific microphone, the MV7, to where those Tech Dive shows, you can get specific information. You'll find them listed on certain pages on the BSW USA website. You also find them on our YouTube channel, and we keep adding to them as we have more material. They're about 10 minutes long, roughly, and there you can just get information on different elements of what you're doing. With Soren and with Michael, obviously, we focused on Shure microphone products. We have Tech Dive programs on a lot of different topics. So the reason I'm there is not because of my technical expertise, but because I do the interview. I'm not the interview subject, because I'm not the expert that Michael is. So
one thing this is one fact I think is really interesting about all microphones, is that when people who are not into the details of it, the microphone diaphragm, when it's working, is moving a millionth of an inch. That's all it moves when you talk. And it's just really astonishing. And people say to me, well, you know, I've got an older microphone and a newer microphone, the same model number, and they don't sound exactly the same. And I'm thinking, so you've been using that other microphone for 30 years. You've been spitting on it. It's getting wet. And then a little dust gets on the diaphragm. What do you think a few specks of dust will do to something that moves a millionth of an inch? Probably will affect it.
Yeah.
You know, and they tend to think about loudspeakers where they can see the cone move, but microphones are just, you know, we measure them in angstroms as far as how far they move. And it's just,
even Mick, even Elvis, even Roger Daltrey of the Who, their microphone diaphragms only move a millionth of an inch.
Yeah, exactly. So
can't do anything about it, no matter how much they
right. So it's very, 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 very tiny. And you can't really sing loud enough to distort a dynamic microphone, no matter how loud you think you can, because you just, you know, just doesn't work. So
there may be distortion, but then you go talk to the front of house guy.
Exactly right. It's the microphone distorting the input on the mixer. So,
which, by the way, nobody ever asked me to do front of house engineering, and there was a good reason for that.
Yeah.
Hey, when you get one, you don't lose them. They're really good. They're very valuable people.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
We do have another question, and it's about what's your recommendation regarding soundproofing for someone who's starting out?
I'll talk about a little bit about that, just because the fact that in hindsight, I've loved my career. I've been at Shure for 45 years, but in hindsight, if I had known about this when I was in college, I probably would have gone into acoustical engineering, because I find it fascinating. And there's two different things you have to distinguish between making the room quieter as far as stopping reflections in the room, which you can do with fuzz and soft stuff, and sound isolation, where you're trying to stop sounds coming from somewhere else from getting into your room, where you have to do that with mass and lead and bricks and so forth. So I'm always amused where I see people saying, I've got a studio set up in my house and my wife says it bothers her in the next room, so I'm going to put up a bunch of foam on the wall. Going to do nothing for that. It's going to pass right through that. So the first thing you have to really distinguish is, am I trying to make the room sound deader, which I can do by putting up blankets and foam or something, or am I trying to stop my sound from going to a different room, which is a completely different issue and always expensive and never easy to do.
Wait a minute. You forgot one.
What's that?
That was used for years and years and years.
What, egg crates?
Cardboard egg crates. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, now those disperse.
Next door probably doesn't like the look of it, but
now they disperse the sound, but they still do nothing as far as isolating it. And sound isolation from one room to another is very expensive and has to be done. And even like I've read, like, if just 1% of that room is open, like a little crack under the door, you might as well not have done anything. So yeah, acoustics are fascinating, but you have to really decide, am I trying to make the room sound better, or am I trying to stop my sound from going elsewhere, or stop the sound from coming outside? I happen to have, some of my neighbors have dogs, and I know how expensive it will be to make it so I don't hear those dogs.
Exactly.
But there are, Jared, there are good books on it.
Sure,
that you can read. But
Michael, I think you sound excellent. So I don't know what else you're doing other than the mic you're using, but
nothing.
Everything sounds good.
I mean, the room I'm in has got a lot of books and CDs and so forth. So there's really none of the wall. There are parallel walls, but the walls have enough stuff on them where I don't get any flutter echo. And I'm actually about 9 inches away from the mic. So
okay,
it's working. So keep going. Sorry, Jared.
No, I'm curious if you have a take on that, John.
Well, I do, but only from a general standpoint. Michael studied it a lot more than I have, but absolutely, if you're getting noise from outside, that's going to be an issue. Certain things you could do would be like change the microphone, or change the way you use the microphone. One thing, hey, if you're using the microphone and you're sitting way back here, you got to crank that microphone up a lot more to be able to use. But if you turn it down and you eat the microphone, you are going to eliminate a lot of that side noise. So this is what I've told my sportscasting customers all over the years, that they say, hey, I'm getting too much, too much of the crowd in the sportscast. Well, you're talking to somebody who did an awful lot of basketball games in the high school gyms sitting next to the tuba player. So don't tell me what I haven't already done. But again, just like that, you take one of these guys, you eat the microphone, and then you turn it down. You want to turn up the headphones so you can easily hear, and you can hear the nuances. You don't want to turn them up so much that your ears are bleeding, but you turn the earphones up, turn the microphone down, and basically eat it. That can do a lot to minimize what's going on next door.
Your headphone idea is interesting, though. If you're a person that likes to move like that, you might think about a head-worn microphone because it keeps the mic a constant distance from your mouth. And therefore, if you're just a nervous type, or you like to look left and right and you want to keep a constant level, putting the microphone on your head really does a lot for that.
Exactly.
Or I'm trained when I'm talking to basically keep a consistent distance and so forth. But like I say, John was doing this and then walking like that. If you do this type of thing, then you don't really want to have a stationary microphone. You want to have a microphone that moves with you.
What's a good
one of those too?
What's a good recommendation for a headset?
Again, it depends on the usage.
Sure.
If it's going to be in the studio, it might be a little bit different than, personally, I like head-worn microphones, which are, just that little tube coming off of your ear. You get 2 ear caps so it doesn't shake around on you.
Yep.
And then that's a condenser, so you got to have a phantom power source, and then a separate set of earbuds or cans or whatever. I just like that particular sound. Nothing wrong with this kind of a unit at all. They work fine. It's a dynamic. Right. We take that out for events because we made it simpler and we have less things going on. So the thing about condensers is generally, Michael, you're going to pick up more side noise than you are going to with a dynamic.
Here's a fun fact, and that is if you take a moving coil, which has got it's got a coil of wire and a diaphragm, and you compare the weight of that to a condenser element weighs 1/1000th as much as a moving coil. So consequently, the condenser element is so lightweight that any noise in the room is going to be picked up by it. Yeah. And so really the heavier weight of a dynamic, to a certain extent, works in your advantage by somewhat ignoring some of those softer sounds that you don't want to hear.
Particularly for a podcaster or anybody like you're talking about that does move around, right. Hey, at least the microphone is always with you. So right. It's a good way. There are several good lines on there. Shure's got a great one themselves. So it's just, part of it comes down to, frankly, the earphones.
Yep. Yeah. What's comfortable. What's comfortable too.
That was where I was going with, because some like big earphones, some like little earphones. So you're going to have to try it out different ways. But having that microphone always there is an advantage for your show. So again, you're not concentrating on microphone technique. You're concentrating on your content, which is why you're doing the podcast in the first place.
Right. But the head-worn microphones, no matter by Sennheiser or Shure or Bayer, they tend not to have the full sound that big they don't have the SM7 sound.
Well, because they're not that big. They're not this size. So there you go. So that's another thing. And as long as you set up your studio, whatever, and we call it a studio, whether it's your closet, your bedroom, whatever, it's your studio. Okay. Right. Yeah. So as long as you set that up to where you can work how you want to be able to work with your interviews and everything else like that without doing this and falling off the microphone and such, whatever it is, what works for you, that's what you do.
Right. And all in all, it's the content of what you're saying. Mm-hmm. You can have the greatest sound in the world, and if you're boring, no one's going to listen to you.
However, you can also have the greatest content in the world, and if your technical sound is not very good,
that's
the
correct.
bulk of your listenership, keep this in mind. Yep. Very important. You have dedicated listenership. I always use the example of high school sports because I did so much in there. All right. You have the parents. You have the booster club. That's your active listenership. Then you have everybody else out there that would be the casual listeners. And when you come on and you do something and the sound quality is just grating on you, like today, we didn't talk about this back in the 70s, okay? Because we didn't have cell phones. We didn't have cell phone sound on the air, but we could only do telephones. Now we've got a whole lot of other ways that we can do this and make it sound like you're in studio even when you're not. And your guests can sound in studio even when they're not. That's important in 2021 because there are way more choices for the listeners today than there were when I started in 1973.
Yeah, very true. Very true.
Well, you mentioned earlier, John, that if people want to get an SM7B, they can go to bswusa.com, use that promo code SM7B, and then they get a discount.
Remember that promo code, call us. We'll tell you what it is, but SM7B. That's through Friday, April 30th, online or on the phone at 800-426-8434.
Excellent. Gentlemen, as we wrap up here, do you have any final words of encouragement for podcasters who are working hard to try to share their ideas and their content in a very noisy world? Keep doing it. Okay.
There is you cannot practice too much. You cannot do this too much. Every time there is no book out there that says, hey, do this. At some point, you got to throw on the microphone and do it. Keep doing that.
And I would say, listen to your pacing. One of my favorite voiceover guys is Bill Curtis, who's been around forever. And I remember Bill Curtis came in and did some work for Shure, and he nailed like a half an hour script in 35 minutes. But it was all about the pacing. And so, stop, add periods, add commas, listen to your pacing.
Gentlemen, thank you so much. We really appreciate this. And I hope to see both of you in Nashville this August, if it's safe and you guys can make it. We're planning on being there. But regardless, we really appreciate your time today. Thank you.
And a pleasure.
Thanks, Jared. Thank you, sir.
All right. Thanks, guys.